When you hear the name Chuck Norris, what comes to mind? For some, it's the lightning-fast kicks, the intense stare, and the unforgettable fight scenes that defined action cinema in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. For others, it's the legendary Walker, Texas Ranger, a show that became a global phenomenon, inspiring millions and running for nearly a decade. And for younger generations, it's the endless stream of Chuck Norris facts, those tongue-in-cheek internet jokes that painted him as an almost superhuman force of nature, capable of splitting atoms with a single roundhouse kick. But behind the myths, the memes, and the Hollywood fame is a man whose real-life story is far more inspiring, and at times heartbreaking, than any role he ever played on screen. Born in the small town of Ryan, Oklahoma, in 1940, Carlos Ray Chuck Norris came into a world of poverty, uncertainty, and struggle. His father battled alcoholism, his family lived in near destitution, and as a boy, Chuck was shy, insecure, and far from the image of the indestructible fighter we know today. It was in those difficult early years that the seeds of resilience were planted. Resilience that would carry him through a journey spanning the Air Force, martial arts championships, Hollywood stardom, internet immortality, and eventually, a quieter life dedicated to family and faith. Now, at 85 years old, Chuck Norris remains one of the most beloved and enduring cultural figures in American history. But what happened to him at this stage of life will leave you deeply emotional. Carlos Ray Norris was born on March 10, 1940, in the rural town of Ryan, Oklahoma. His parents, Wilma and Ray Norris, lived a hard life. Ray was a World War II Army veteran who struggled with alcoholism, drifting from one odd job to another, unable to provide stability for the family. His drinking often kept him absent, both physically and emotionally, leaving Chuck's mother to raise him and his two younger brothers, Wieland and Aaron, largely on her own. Chuck was a quiet child, painfully shy and insecure. He often described himself as a skinny, non-athletic boy who felt invisible in school. He lacked confidence, and his father's absence weighed heavily on him. Yet, in those years of hardship, Chuck found his greatest pillar of strength, his mother Wilma. A devout Christian with unwavering faith, she instilled in him the values of perseverance, humility, and belief in God's plan. Life was not easy. Money was scarce, and the family frequently moved, chasing opportunities for survival. At times, they lived in tiny rented homes or even relatives' houses, scraping by on what little income they had. Chuck's grades were poor, not because he wasn't intelligent, but because he was constantly distracted by worry, about his father, about the family's struggles, and about fitting in with the other children. By the time Chuck was a teenager, the instability in his home life grew unbearable. His parents' marriage ended in divorce, leaving Wilma to continue raising the boys alone. This period was one of the darkest in Chuck's young life. He often felt aimless, without direction, and haunted by self-doubt. He wasn't the strongest kid, he wasn't an athlete, and he wasn't particularly popular. In his own words, he felt destined for a life of mediocrity. Yet, beneath the surface of this shy boy was a spark waiting to be lit. The hardships of his childhood, poverty, insecurity, a broken home, were shaping him in ways he couldn't yet understand. They were building resilience, teaching him empathy, and preparing him for the discipline that martial arts and military life would soon demand. Chuck's journey from that uncertain boy in Oklahoma to the legend we know today was not immediate. It would take leaving home, serving his country, and discovering martial arts thousands of miles away in South Korea before his true transformation began. And it was in the Air Force that fate would intervene, forever altering the course of his life. By the late 1950s, Chuck Norris was searching for a sense of direction. School had not given him much confidence, and his home life was still marked by instability. Like many young men of his generation, he found his path through the military. In 1958, at the age of 18, Chuck enlisted in the United States Air Force. He was assigned to the Air Police, now known as Security Forces, and was soon stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea. It was there, thousands of miles from home, that Chuck would stumble into the discovery that would change his life forever: martial arts. In South Korea, Chuck was introduced to Tang Soo Do, a traditional Korean martial art that emphasizes powerful kicks, strikes, and discipline. At first, he was captivated by the fluid movements and precision of the practitioners he saw. Unlike anything he had encountered back home, Tang Soo Do seemed to combine athletic ability with spiritual discipline. Two things he lacked but desperately craved. Training was not easy. Chuck admitted he was awkward, uncoordinated, and far from a natural talent. But what he lacked in natural ability, he made up for with relentless perseverance. After long days serving in the Air Force, he would spend hours each night training in local dojangs, martial arts schools. His determination to master the techniques impressed his instructors, and slowly, his body began to transform. By the time his service in Korea was over, Chuck had not only earned black belts but also discovered a lifelong passion: Martial arts gave him something he had never truly felt before: confidence. For the shy, insecure boy from Oklahoma, martial arts unlocked the discipline, focus, and self-respect he had been searching for his entire life. When Chuck returned to the United States in 1962, he brought more than just his uniform and memories of military life. He brought with him the foundation of a skill set that would eventually make him world famous. Settling in California, he began working as an air policeman while simultaneously teaching martial arts on the side. At first, few believed martial arts would ever become popular in America. But Chuck Norris was about to prove everyone wrong. By the mid-1960s, Chuck Norris was no longer the insecure boy he once was. He had become a dedicated martial artist with a vision. He began entering karate tournaments across the country, quickly gaining a reputation for his powerful kicks and disciplined fighting style. Success did not come immediately. In fact, Chuck lost several of his early tournaments. But instead of being discouraged, he treated each defeat as a lesson. "Every loss taught me more than every win," he would later reflect. That mindset of constant improvement became his greatest weapon. In 1968, everything changed. Norris won the Professional Middleweight Karate Championship, a title he would hold for 6 consecutive years. His dominance in the karate world made him one of the most feared and respected fighters of his era. He competed against, and often defeated, some of the greatest martial artists in the world. But Norris wasn't just fighting for titles. He was also working tirelessly to spread martial arts throughout America. He opened his first karate studio in Torrance, California, teaching students not just the physical aspects of martial arts but also the philosophy behind them: discipline, respect, and self-control. Among his students were celebrities who would later play a role in his Hollywood journey. Steve McQueen, Priscilla Presley, and Bob Barker all trained under him. McQueen, in particular, would encourage Norris to try his hand at acting, planting a seed that would grow into his second career. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Chuck Norris had become one of the most successful martial artists in the United States. He wasn't just a champion, he was a pioneer, introducing a new generation of Americans to the power and discipline of martial arts. What had started as a way to build his own confidence had now become his mission: to inspire others to find their strength through martial arts. But Norris' rise was only beginning. His friendship with a legendary martial artist named Bruce Lee would soon catapult him into a whole new world, one that would make his name known around the globe. By the early 1970s, Chuck Norris was a household name in the martial arts community. He had earned championships, built successful dojos, and was widely respected for his discipline and skill. But outside of martial arts circles, few knew his name. That was about to change, thanks to a chance connection with a man who would become one of the greatest icons of all time: Bruce Lee. Chuck first met Bruce in the late 1960s during a martial arts demonstration in Long Beach, California. Bruce was already making waves as an actor and martial artist, while Chuck was carving his reputation as a fierce competitor. The two men were instantly drawn to each other, not only as fighters but as thinkers. Both shared a deep philosophy about martial arts being more than just combat; it was a way of life. What started as a professional respect quickly blossomed into a close friendship. They trained together, sparred for hours, and exchanged techniques. Chuck admired Bruce's lightning speed and fluid movements, while Bruce was fascinated by Chuck's powerful kicks and relentless discipline. In those training sessions, the seeds of cinematic history were quietly being planted. In 1972, Bruce Lee reached out to Chuck with a proposition that would forever change his life. He wanted Chuck to play his opponent in a new film titled The Way of the Dragon, also known as Return of the Dragon in the United States. The role wasn't just another fight scene, it was the climax of the entire movie. Chuck was hesitant at first. He had never acted before, and Hollywood was still a world foreign to him. But Bruce reassured him, telling him that authenticity was more important than acting experience. "Just fight the way you fight," Bruce said. "That's all I need." Filming took place in Rome, inside the historic Colosseum. What came out of it was one of the most iconic fight scenes in cinematic history. The duel between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris wasn't just a battle, it was a dance, a showcase of two martial arts philosophies clashing in front of millions of viewers. Chuck played the heavy, the seemingly unstoppable force, until Bruce's agility and creativity finally overcame him. Audiences were mesmerized. The scene was raw, realistic, and unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Even though Chuck's character lost the fight, Norris himself emerged victorious. Overnight, he was introduced to an international audience, no longer just a martial arts champion but now a bona fide film presence. Chuck later admitted that Bruce Lee had been the one to open the door for him. "Bruce was not only a friend but also the man who gave me my start in films. Without him, I may never have pursued acting," Norris once reflected. After The Way of the Dragon, Norris began receiving more offers. At first, the roles were small and often typecast him as the tough martial artist. But Chuck wasn't content with being just a supporting fighter in other people's stories. He had bigger dreams. He wanted to become a leading man, an action hero in his own right. That determination would push him into the next phase of his career. The shy, insecure boy from Oklahoma had already transformed into a martial arts champion. Now, with Hollywood calling, he was on the verge of becoming something even greater, a global action star. After his breakout appearance in The Way of the Dragon, 1972, Chuck Norris was no longer just a martial arts champion. He was a man with a new destiny. Though he had been introduced to the global audience through Bruce Lee's film, Chuck was determined not to remain in anyone's shadow. He wanted to forge his own identity in Hollywood. In the mid-1970s, Chuck began landing lead roles in American action films. His first big breakthrough came with Good Guys Wear Black, 1978. The film was low budget and independently produced, but it struck a chord with audiences. Chuck played John T. Booker, a former covert operative pulled back into action. With his stoic presence, signature roundhouse kicks, and rugged charisma, Chuck embodied a new kind of American action hero, one rooted not in bravado, but in quiet strength. The film's success made Norris a bankable star, and soon he was cast in a string of action-packed movies: A Force of One, 1979, The Octagon, 1980, and An Eye for an Eye, 1981. Each film built on his growing reputation as a martial arts powerhouse who could hold his own as a leading man. By the time Lone Wolf McQuade, 1983, hit theaters, Chuck had cemented himself as a fan favorite. The film, which paired him with legendary actor David Carradine, blended Western grit with martial arts intensity, and it became a cult classic. But it was in the 1980s that Chuck Norris' career truly exploded. He became one of the defining action heroes of the decade, standing shoulder to shoulder with Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Films like Missing in Action, 1984, and The Delta Force, 1986, turned him into a patriotic symbol of American might. At a time when Cold War tensions loomed large, Norris characters often portrayed the ideal of the unstoppable American warrior, fighting for justice, rescuing hostages, and standing up to tyranny. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Chuck's films often carried a moral message. His characters weren't just mercenaries for hire, they were men of integrity, fighting for family, freedom, and country. Audiences connected with that authenticity. Norris wasn't flashy, and he wasn't trying to be glamorous. He was the everyman's hero, stoic, disciplined, and quietly unstoppable. By the late 1980s, Chuck Norris had achieved what many thought impossible. He had transitioned from martial arts champion to Hollywood action star. But his career was about to take yet another leap, this time to television, where he would create a role that would make him a household name for an entirely new generation. In the early 1990s, Chuck Norris was presented with an opportunity that would change the trajectory of his career forever: a chance to star in a television series. At first, he was hesitant. Movies had made him an action icon, and television at the time was seen as a step down for big screen stars. But when producers pitched him the idea of playing a Texas Ranger, a lawman who embodied both toughness and morality, Chuck saw potential. In 1993, Walker, Texas Ranger debuted on CBS. Norris played Cordell Walker, a martial arts expert and lawman who fought criminals while teaching moral lessons along the way. Unlike many action shows of its era, Walker wasn't built solely on violence or spectacle. Instead, it wove in themes of justice, compassion, and community service. Each episode carried a moral takeaway, reinforcing Chuck's own values of integrity, faith, and discipline. The show quickly became a hit. Audiences were drawn to its mix of action, drama, and heartwarming storytelling. Norris' martial arts skills brought authenticity to the fight sequences, while his calm and steady presence made Walker an instantly iconic character. Children and families watched the show together, and for many, Walker, Texas Ranger became a Saturday night tradition. Over its 8-year run, Walker produced more than 200 episodes and gained a loyal fan base around the world. It wasn't just an American hit. International audiences embraced the show, seeing Norris as a symbol of justice and moral clarity. The series even inspired parodies and comedic sketches, further cementing its place in pop culture. For Chuck, the show was more than just entertainment. It was a way to reach people with positive messages. He worked to ensure that Walker, Texas Ranger, promoted values like honesty, respect, and perseverance. In a television landscape often dominated by cynicism, the show stood out for its earnestness, and that sincerity came directly from Chuck himself. By the time the series ended in 2001, Chuck Norris was no longer just an action star. He was a television legend. Walker, Texas Ranger gave him a platform that extended his influence far beyond the big screen. Parents saw him as a role model for their kids. Martial artists saw him as an ambassador for their discipline. And fans of all ages saw him as the ultimate embodiment of toughness and integrity. The shy boy from Oklahoma had become not just a champion or a movie star, but a global symbol of resilience and morality. And though Hollywood had given him fame, Chuck Norris' next chapter would prove that his impact went far beyond film and television. By the time Walker, Texas Ranger ended in 2001, Chuck Norris had already achieved more than most could dream of: martial arts champion, action film star, and television icon. Yet, he wasn't content to simply rest on his legacy. For Chuck, fame was never just about the spotlight, it was about using his platform to inspire and give back. One of the ways he did this was through writing. Chuck authored several books over the years, covering everything from martial arts philosophy to fitness and spirituality. Titles like The Secret of Inner Strength, My Story, 1988, and Against All Odds, My Story, 2004, gave readers a candid look into his journey, emphasizing not just his victories, but also his struggles and failures along the way. His writings carried the same themes that defined his life: discipline, perseverance, and faith. Norris' deep Christian faith played a central role in both his personal life and his public persona. Unlike many Hollywood figures, Chuck spoke openly about his beliefs, crediting God and his mother's unwavering prayers for guiding him through life's challenges. His faith wasn't a performance, it was a cornerstone of who he was. Beyond writing and faith, Chuck turned much of his energy toward philanthropy. Perhaps his most enduring contribution was the creation of the Kickstart Kids Foundation, a program he launched in 1990 with the goal of teaching middle and high school students character development through martial arts. The program emphasized discipline, respect, and responsibility, values Norris believed were essential for young people navigating an increasingly complex world. Over the years, Kickstart Kids grew to impact tens of thousands of students across Texas, shaping not just their physical abilities, but their moral compass as well. Chuck also became a sought-after motivational speaker. His story, rising from poverty and insecurity to global stardom, was living proof of the power of perseverance. Whether addressing corporate audiences, schools, or churches, Norris carried a message that transcended martial arts: that success is built not on talent alone, but on discipline, humility, and determination. As he entered the 2000s, Chuck Norris was no longer just an action hero, he was a mentor, philanthropist, and role model. And just when it seemed his career might settle into a quieter phase, something unexpected happened. The internet, in its early days of viral culture, decided to crown Chuck Norris with a new, larger-than-life identity. And this new wave of fame would be unlike anything he or anyone could have imagined. In the mid-2000s, as social media and internet humor began to explode, a strange phenomenon took over pop culture: Chuck Norris Facts. It started in 2005 as a satirical website where users posted absurd, exaggerated jokes about Norris' toughness and invincibility. The facts ranged from the comically impossible, "Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he pushes the earth down," to the downright hilarious, "When the boogeyman goes to bed, he checks his closet for Chuck Norris." What began as an internet inside joke quickly snowballed into a cultural phenomenon. Within months, Chuck Norris Facts spread across college campuses, message boards, and eventually mainstream media. Late-night comedians referenced them, celebrities repeated them, and millions of fans worldwide shared them as part of the growing internet meme culture. For many celebrities, being the butt of a joke could be damaging. But Chuck Norris approached it differently. Instead of rejecting or resenting the phenomenon, he embraced it with humor and humility. He laughed at the facts, and even incorporated them into public appearances. At one point, he joked that he had to check his bed for himself before going to sleep. His willingness to play along only made the phenomenon bigger. Suddenly, teenagers and young adults who had never seen Walker, Texas Ranger, or his action films were talking about Chuck Norris daily. His name became shorthand for toughness, invincibility, and legendary status. The phenomenon even led to commercial success. Books were published, merchandise was sold, and Chuck himself eventually collaborated with brands to parody the facts in commercials. The internet had taken a man already respected for his real-life accomplishments and elevated him into a mythical figure, larger than life and untouchable. For Norris, the Chuck Norris Facts craze was more than just a funny trend, it was a reminder of how deeply he had embedded himself into popular culture. Few stars from the 1970s and 80s managed to reinvent themselves for the digital age, but Chuck Norris did so effortlessly. By embracing the jokes rather than fighting them, he connected with a whole new generation. At a time when many actors his age were fading from public consciousness, Chuck Norris had, once again, become a household name. Only this time, it wasn't because of a karate kick or a roundhouse, it was because the internet had decided he was simply too legendary to ever be forgotten. For much of his career, Chuck Norris seemed indestructible. On screen, he fought armies single-handedly. In real life, he trained his body with relentless discipline and maintained a healthy lifestyle. But even action heroes are not immune to life's toughest battles. The most heartbreaking trial of Chuck's personal life came not from his own health, but from that of his beloved wife, Gena O'Kelly. In 2013, Gena underwent a series of routine medical treatments. What followed was a nightmare neither of them expected. After receiving multiple injections for contrast imaging tests, she began experiencing intense burning sensations throughout her body, coupled with debilitating pain, fatigue, and cognitive decline. Within days, her health spiraled, leaving her bedridden and struggling to function. Chuck was devastated. Here was the woman who had given him new purpose in life, now suffering and unable to find relief. He later described watching her condition as the worst thing I've ever been through. Doctors struggled to explain the cause, but Gena and Chuck believed she was suffering from a severe reaction to gadolinium, a contrast dye commonly used in MRI scans. Determined to save her, Chuck put his career on hold entirely. At the height of his financial success, he walked away from Hollywood, endorsements, and public appearances. "I gave up my film career to save her life," he later revealed. Over the next several years, the couple spent millions of dollars on treatments, therapies, and travel in search of answers. Chuck became Gena's primary caregiver, standing by her side day and night. His devotion was so complete that it reminded many of the values he portrayed on screen. Only this time, the battle was real, and the stakes were far greater. The fight took an enormous toll on their family. Lawsuits were filed against medical companies, public campaigns raised awareness, and Chuck's once very public life became private, revolving around caring for Gena. For years, fans wondered why he had vanished from Hollywood, and the answer was simple: love. Through unwavering faith and sheer determination, Gena slowly improved, though the scars of that ordeal remain. For Chuck, the experience was both a test of his strength and a reminder that even the strongest warriors face battles they cannot fight with their fists. This chapter of his life revealed a deeper truth about Chuck Norris: that behind the legendary toughness was a man of extraordinary compassion, willing to sacrifice everything for the woman he loved. In March 2020, Chuck Norris celebrated his 80th birthday. For many fans, it was a surreal milestone. The man they grew up watching defeat entire armies in films and television had reached an age few could picture him at. Yet Chuck greeted the occasion with the same humility and gratitude that had defined his entire journey. At 80, Norris was no longer the on-screen action star. He had retired from Hollywood years earlier, dedicating himself to his family and Gena's health. But he remained active in other ways. He continued writing, sharing motivational messages, and supporting his foundation, Kickstart Kids, which had by then reached more than 100,000 students since its founding. Despite his quieter life, Norris still made occasional appearances, whether at martial arts tournaments, fan conventions, or special cameos in commercials and films. Each time, the response was overwhelming. Fans lined up for hours to meet him, eager to shake the hand of a man who had been both an action hero and a symbol of integrity. The world had changed dramatically by the time Chuck turned 80. The rise of digital media meant that new generations were growing up knowing him not just through Walker, Texas Ranger, but also through the internet jokes and memes that kept his legend alive. Chuck, ever humble, took it all in stride. He often laughed about the Chuck Norris facts, saying they were a fun way to connect with younger fans. But behind the jokes and celebrations, turning 80 also prompted reflection. Chuck spoke openly about aging, faith, and family. He credited his longevity to a disciplined lifestyle, clean eating, daily exercise, and a refusal to give in to negativity. More importantly, he credited God and his wife for giving his life meaning. Even at 80, Norris carried himself with the same quiet strength he always had. He was no longer throwing roundhouse kicks on the big screen, but he was still fighting battles. This time for health, for family, and for legacy. In 2025, Chuck Norris turned 85 years old. For millions of fans around the world, the milestone was both a celebration and a reminder of the passage of time. The action hero who once seemed larger than life is now an elder statesman of Hollywood, a living legend whose story has stretched across 8.5 decades. Today, Chuck lives a quiet life with his wife Gena on their ranch in Texas. Surrounded by family, he spends much of his time away from the public eye, choosing peace and privacy over fame. His children and grandchildren remain close, and family gatherings are central to his life. Physically, age has slowed him, as it does everyone. The roundhouse kicks are behind him, and his once rigorous martial arts training has given way to gentler exercise routines focused on health and mobility. Yet, even at 85, Chuck remains remarkably fit compared to most his age, a testament to decades of discipline. Fans who have seen him at recent appearances note that while he walks more carefully and speaks with a softer tone, his spirit remains unshakable. Occasionally, Chuck steps back into the spotlight, appearing at charity events, martial arts exhibitions, or fan conventions. Each appearance is met with standing ovations and emotional tributes. To many, seeing Chuck Norris at 85 is a reminder of their own youth, of growing up watching him take on villains and inspire millions. But perhaps what moves fans most is not his physical strength, but his emotional strength. His devotion to his wife, his perseverance through trials, and his humility despite fame have made him not just an action star, but a role model. At 85, Chuck Norris represents more than just movies and memes. He represents resilience. He represents love. He represents the idea that no matter how tough life gets, faith and perseverance can carry you through. And while his days of on-screen battles are behind him, his greatest legacy is the one he continues to live quietly each day, being a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a man of faith who never stopped fighting for what mattered most. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the values of strength, perseverance, and family that Chuck Norris has lived by, then we invite you to be part of this community. Do not forget to like this video to show your support. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another video. And turn on the notification bell so you are the first to know when we share more videos about the legends you love. Because stories like Chuck Norris remind us all that true heroism is not found only in movies. It is found in the way we live, love, and fight for what matters most.